Wait. Hold up. There is a heritage-looking, horn-loaded loudspeaker, and it's not from KLIPSCH? Go on. Looking like it stepped right out of a control room, the 4309 harkens back to a golden age of studio monitors, and JBL was a staple in those days, and a lot of their designs have remained in relatively constant production since their release decades ago. And this two-way passive speaker represents the entry point for JBL's studio monitor line. And the 4309 features a 6.5-inch woofer, a 1-inch HDI horn-loaded tweeter, which combined with its front-facing ports give it a reported frequency response of 42 Hz to 30 kHz, which isn't quite full range, but still very impressive for a smaller speaker. Now, in terms of design, JBL is making no attempt to hide the 4309's pro audio type features, like its high-frequency attenuation switch, which adjusts the tweeter's response by plus or minus 1 dB for greater flexibility in difficult rooms. For example, if you have a room that is on the brighter side, one with a lot of hard, reflective surfaces, setting the tweeter to -1 may keep the JBL from seeming too bright. On the other hand, if your room is wall-to-wall carpet, juicing the tweeter to +1 may bring some of its presence back. The speaker ships with the tweeter set to neutral or 0, which for our tests, this is where we left it, though I can report that this feature does work and the results are both audible and measurable. Despite being a 4-ohm speaker with a relative modest sensitivity of 87 dB, the JBL isn't terribly difficult to power. We used a variety of amps and receivers, with our favorite pairings being the Marantz 8015 receiver for home theater use and the Technics SUG 700 Mark II for stereo. But even when using the 50 watt per channel Audiolab 6000A Play, the JBLs didn't miss a beat. Now, because the 4309s are front ported and have a pretty inert cabinet, one capable of controlling resonances that may occur during playback, they're pretty flexible with respect to placement. While I ultimately prefer them pulled out just a bit into our room, they will work closer to your walls. The last horn-loaded JBL speaker that I had in my home was the 3677 screen channel speaker, which is a commercial speaker coming from JBL's Pro division. I loved those speakers, though I fully admit they were absolutely overkill for my screening room. Regardless, there was just something about watching movies with them that helped to blur the line between commercial theater and home theater. They were capable of being delicate and nuanced one second and just outright explosive the next. And there was just always this sense of finesse, and the 4309s really take me back to those speakers. And while I no longer have my measurements of the 3677s from back in the day, running a quick sweep on the 4309s from 20 to 20 revealed impressive results. In its neutral configuration, we can see that the JBL is a fairly linear speaker. I say fairly because there is a little bit of added energy present in the mid-range, specifically within the all-important vocal range, something other equally or more neutral speakers have not exhibited when placed in the same spot in our room. This slight boost around 1K results in some added clarity throughout the mids, which pays dividends when listening to singer-songwriters or in discerning film dialogue. Minus that, the JBL is solid in the bass department down to 40 Hz and pretty flat throughout the treble. So what does all that mean in real-world terms? Simply put, the JBL is the type of speaker that's going to strive not to color or alter the sound or signal in any way, so it shouldn't outright change the tone or vibe of your favorite music or movies. But does it succeed? Well, in a word, yes, though the speaker isn't without some character. I mean, it does have a horn-loaded tweeter, after all. I quite like the bass response of this speaker. 40 Hz is plenty deep for most music and even most films. Yes, a sub is still going to be necessary if you really want to rock out or feel the acceleration and subsequent boom of the F-18s when watching Top Gun Maverick. But for everyday listening, 40 Hz, it gets it done. The JBL's bass is very taut with almost zero bloat or boominess, and it absolutely nails the texture of instruments like kick drums, bass guitars, and the lower octaves of pianos brilliantly. And you know I love me a good horn speaker. There's just something magical about what a proper horn can do for vocals and mid-range focused instruments, and when it comes to the mid-range, this speaker is at its best. Because its mid-range is shared between both the woofer and the horn-loaded tweeter, there's just a greater sense of presence that you don't always find in non-horn-loaded speakers. But before you take to your keyboards to suggest that I'm saying that this speaker is bright or shouty, don't. Because the JBL is neither. Because when done right, a good horn can lend a greater sense of realism, dimension, presence to the sound. But horns, they've fallen out of fashion over the years, with KLIPSCH really being the only brand still committed to their use. And the reason I bring this up is because for those of you familiar with the KLIPSCH sound, you have to know that the 4309 is going to sound nothing like what you're used to. The JBL's upper mid-range and treble is not thrown at you. It also doesn't shout when pushed. There is a smoothness to the JBL as you near the treble, not to mention incredible coherence, and that is impressive considering that the JBL is crossing over the woofer and the tweeter near the middle of the vocal range. The 4309's upper mid-range and treble performance is delicate, nimble, and largely colorless. Even with a horn waveguide, there is almost no discernible megaphone-like effect to vocals or the treble itself. And this results in natural-sounding dialogue that has an in-room feel, not to mention increased intelligibility, which is great if you like singer-songwriters like Beth Hart or just have a hard time understanding dialogue in newer films. As for soundstage and dynamics, the JBLs are capable of tremendous scale and accuracy when it comes to instrument and artist placement. Center imaging is excellent, though I felt it was strongest when the speakers were towed in slightly towards my listening position. This keeps dialogue locked in place when watching movies without a center speaker, which is our preferred way to enjoy our home theater setup. Dynamics, incredible. Never sloppy or vague. This is just a very well-built speaker, and as a result, there is just no bloat or resonance or blurriness when driven hard or when faced with sudden dynamic swings, which is what you want when listening at high volumes in excess of 90 dB, because nothing is going to take you out of a concert or movie like muddy sound, and the JBL is anything but muddy. Speaking of movies, if I were to build a dedicated screening room in my home again, I would definitely put the JBLs on my short list. I loved watching movies through them. But before you rush out and make these your next pair of two-way speakers, know that the 4309s are not alone in terms of competition. In fact, you can achieve very similar levels of performance and sound quality for less. Compared to the REVEL M16s we reviewed earlier this year, which is another Harman-owned brand, the JBL isn't that different. These two speakers are more alike sonically than they are different, though there is still a little something special with respect to the JBL's use of a horn waveguide that the REVEL just can't quite match. But if you don't care about that, the M16 is almost every bit as good, but for less than half the price. The REVEL doesn't have the JBL styling or a cabinet that is as well constructed, which means you're going to find some bloom down low with the REVELs, but minus those caveats, these two speakers, they're damn near twins. Sonus Faber's Lumina 2 will also run you around half as much while performing very similarly to the JBL. The 2s have a more pronounced treble response, which may come off as bright to some of you. And this rise in the treble may trick you into thinking the Luminas are leaner in the mid-range, but honestly, the differences aren't significant. In terms of bass, you're going to eke out just a bit more with the JBL, but if you're planning on using a sub, that difference, it's not going to matter. Even the new PRO-JECT SPEAKERBOX 5S2 deserves to be mentioned here, for it too is comparable in terms of performance, and with respect to build quality, it's on par with and maybe even surpasses the construction of the JBL. But it does so for less than $1,000. Where the JBL shines in comparison is its bass. The PRO-JECT does not have the same bass output the JBL does, so in my opinion, a sub is not optional here, whereas depending on your personal preference, you may be able to skip the sub by going with the JBL. As for other JBL designs, the 4309 is similar in size to that of the L82, which I love. They have very similar sounds, though if you tend to not like horns, the L82 may be more to your liking, though I believe the 4309 is the better constructed speaker. I have not heard the smaller L52 or the powered version of the 4309, so I can't comment on how those two compare. The JBL 4309 is it's an impressive speaker, one that I think both music and movie fans are going to love. And I think JBL is on a bit of a roll lately, especially with respect to their more iconic designs, and the 4309 may be my favorite of the bunch. The bookshelf or two-way speaker market it's hotter than ever, but JBL enters the fray with a speaker that is incredibly hard to beat with the 4309. I mean, what else is there to say? I love this thing, and it is highly recommended. So that's it. That is now my take on JBL's 4309. What do you think, Kristi?
Well, look, you can't talk about a horn speaker and not directly compare them to KLIPSCH. Specifically the Heresy IVs and the new 600M Mark II. I mean,
Okay.
epic fail, Robinson, epic fail. It's like you don't even know our audience. They've already, they tuned out 15 minutes ago and they're like, well, what about the Heresies? Come on. So I await your...
You await my response.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the Heresies, if I'm not mistaken, costs $1,000 or $1,200 more than these. They are a true 3-way speaker, whereas this is a 2-way speaker. Both trade on nostalgia, obviously. The Heresy IV is going to sound bigger, broader, and be far more lively, which can be very exciting. And if you like to recreate the more live venue music, whatever, the Heresies are still going to be a better fit for those types of listeners. Now, with respect to the 600M Mark II, again, another great speaker with a slightly more lively sound compared to the JBL, though nowhere near as lively as previous KLIPSCH RP designs. And so in a lot of ways, KLIPSCH is steering the RP line or the 600M Mark II more towards the 4309. I still prefer the 4309, but I do understand that the 600M Mark II is like well under $1,000. I even think as of this recording, it's on like a mad sale, which makes it even cheaper. Both good. I think long-term investment, long-term listenability, the 4309 is going to be the better pick. And if you want a little bit more treble presence a la KLIPSCH, you can always dial it up with the JBL. Whereas with the KLIPSCH, if it turns out to still not be your cup of tea, you're going to have to rely on the tone controls on, say, your amplifier, if it has tone controls, to kind of bring that down. Also, the 600M Mark II is going to have more pronounced bass, and that is also going to come out in the form of a little bit more port bloom, because it has that rear-facing port. So the 600M is going to be a little bit harder to place in a room compared to the flexibility that the JBL affords you. So that's how I would compare.
Very good. Much better. You barely escaped that one.
All right.
Well, look, now we're on to my turn.
Oh, your turn.
My turn. I personally really like them. I love the design, and I feel like they really nailed the vintage look without crossing into reproduction territory.
Yeah.
Which I think happens a lot these days.
Yeah.
I actually preferred them for watching movies and TV shows. I thought dialogue clarity was pretty good. Not as good as the Q Acoustic Concept 50s.
Okay.
But when it comes to scale and like pulling off those big blockbuster type sounds, I thought the JBL does take the slight edge there. For me, the biggest question is, would I go with these or something like the Heresy IVs? I think that the JBLs are just a little bit more forgiving of more genres of music than the Heresies, so I could see a lot of people liking the JBLs for that reason specifically.
Yeah.
For home theater, I would definitely choose these. If I could have both, I think that would be having the best, literally, of both worlds.
Sure.
I would definitely put these in a home theater. Like you said, like if you're doing a dedicated home theater room, you should 100% put these near the top of your list.
I'd put them all around me. Like I'd mount them on my side walls as surrounds, back speakers. I'd use them 3 across the front, and then figure out some in ceilings from JBL for Atmos channels and call it a day.
I think the biggest, I don't want to say, I guess, I don't know, price is price. It's relative, like what's expensive to somebody is going to be like a drop in the bucket to somebody else.
Right.
But I think that it's going to be, price is going to be the biggest obstacle, just because there are so many awesome 2-way bookshelf speakers out on the market right now that are going to be way more affordable. That is the sort of, that's the only thing that kind of worries me about this particular speaker. And how are they going to find a way to be a part of the conversation when there are so many options available, basically like half the price?
Yeah.
And they're not like ugly black boxes. I mean, I get the REVEL M16, which is a good speaker, but there's no comparison when you're comparing style.
Given how similarly those two speakers perform, of course, I'm going with the JBL, because in the style factor, it's a 10 if the vintage look is your thing, whereas the REVEL, great speaker, but let's face it, it's kind of forgettable style.
They're due for a refresh.
Yeah, they're due for a refresh.
It's long in the tooth.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do. I agree with you. And had we not reviewed the PRO-JECTs as recently, I would have made the case for, well, the difference here is a little bit of style, but what you're paying for is that more inert cabinet over, say, the $700 to $1,000 options, be it REVEL, Sonus Faber, KLIPSCH, whatnot. The cabinet of the 4309 is equally as impressive as the PRO-JECT and equally as inert as the Q Acoustics. But PRO-JECT just came and said, hold my beer, and they brought us a speaker that, near as makes no difference, performs very, very similarly to the 4309 in our room, at least, for what was it, $799 to $849, like, depending on the finish. Regardless of the pricing structure, whether it's $799 or $849, that's still more. That's not half price. That's below half the cost. And I feel kind of the same way about the REVELs too. It's like, if you disregard looks, the REVEL and this speaker measure almost identically in our room, minus some resonance stemming from the cabinet. And if you're someone that's like, ooh, I like a little bit of a bass boost or whatever, you might actually be better off with the REVELs while enjoying the same mid-range and arguably treble performance for way less.
I will say I think that the REVELs did not have the megaphone effect as much as these JBLs. I know that you mentioned that wasn't really an issue. And I'm not trying to say that it's a huge concern, but we did notice in a couple of things that we watched, part of that could have been the way the people were mic'd.
Yeah.
But it was there. You could, in some situations, you may get a little bit of the megaphone effect, but it's not nothing egregious. I'm just, like we say, more you know.
Yeah. It's not that it's not possible or it never happens, but I am going to put the fault on the one time that you made us think about it. We were watching the behind the scenes of Top Gun Maverick, and the way with which it appears that Tom Cruise was mic'd in that EPK lent to some resonance, but that resonance may have occurred in their recording and was not the result of the speakers themselves. But there's ultimately no way for either one of us to know which was the case. So did it happen? Yeah. Is it something I would lose sleep over? Absolutely not. As far as horn-loaded speakers go, this is about as benign as I've ever heard. So that's it. That is now our review of the JBL 4309. What did you guys think? Let us know down in the comments below. My question of the day for you is pretty simple. I don't want to start a fight, but I am curious. Who, in your opinion, makes the best horn-loaded speaker on the market right now? Let's get it going. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Go ahead and ring that bell so that you're notified when new videos come out. If you use any of the links that Kristi leaves for you down below, know that that is a great way that you have continued to show your support for this channel and the work that we do here. And both of us thank you very, very much for doing that. Follow me on Instagram at Recovering Audiophile, and that is it for us today. So remember, the only person who has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. And we'll see you on the next video. Bye.